for coming. I am Congressman Ted Lieu. I want to thank my colleagues who are co-sponsors of major bail reform legislation. We have Bonnie Watson-Coleman, Brenda Lawrence, and Ruben Gallego. You'll see that we all happen to be freshmen because we need fresh thinking on this issue. Our criminal justice is in deep and moral crisis, and one of their central problems is bail. We have over 450,000 people in America who are locked up not because they've been convicted of any crime, but because of their income, because they could not post bail. That is grossly unfair. It is un-American. And when you look at the studies, it also disproportionately affects those who are poor and those who are minorities. I want to also thank Periscope and Parachute TV. They are live streaming this event. And I want to thank New York Times reporter Nick Pinto, who wrote an amazing story last August called The Bail Trap. It was brought to our attention by my constituent Dorothy Reich. If you haven't read it, you should, because it will make you angry. And it talks about story after story of people who have been arrested for the smallest of crimes, such as a guy who had a straw on him, and the cop thought it was drug paraphernalia. He ended up fighting that case. He won the case, but he had to sit at Rikers prison where he was beat up and abused, and he also almost lost his job because he couldn't go back to work because he was sitting in jail, simply because he couldn't pay a very small amount of bail money. I also want to thank the groups that have endorsed this bill. They're ACLU, Southern Poverty Law Center, Equal Justice Under Law, the Pretrial Justice Institute, the Drug Policy Alliance, Latino Justice, the Sentencing Project, Color of Change, National Legal Aid and Defender Association, National Association of Pretrial Services Agencies, Art City Defenders, and the Southern Center for Human Rights. We have a model for how to do it better. Washington, D.C. implemented a no bail cash system. They have had tremendously successful results. And what this bill will do is it will do two things. It will say the federal system can no longer demand cash bail. And second, it's going to tell the states, you need to move to a system that doesn't require posting of cash bail within 3 years. Otherwise, we stop giving you Department of Justice grants known as the Edward Byrne grants. That is basically the bill, and hopefully it will cause systematic change across America. And with that, I would love to introduce my colleague, Representative Bonnie Watson-Coleman. Thank you for coming up.
I want to thank my colleague, Ted Lieu, for reaching out to me, principally because this is an area that I was very interested in, worked very hard in when I was a state legislator. And so I've had, in the state of New Jersey, so I've had the opportunity to work with a number of the organizations that are supporting this piece right here in our criminal justice reform efforts. It is sad when people are languishing in facilities, incarcerated, unable to interact with their families, unable to go to their jobs, unable to raise the money in order to be let out and released so that they can live their normal lives while they're waiting for their hearings, even though they have been arrested and placed in these facilities for crimes that have no violent aspects to their situation. We see that this has broken up families. We see that this has obviously created unemployment, chronic unemployment, pernicious unemployment. And we also know that keeping these individuals in prison or letting them out has not negatively impacted the safety and security of our communities. At the same time, these very poor individuals are incarcerated. Those who have been locked up for very violent crimes, crimes that involve serious issues, often have access to the money that puts them back out on the street. So that is not only fair, that is not only unjust, that is un-American, that we can let those individuals out on the street have their negative continuous impact on the community while these poor individuals are languishing in prison. There are alternatives to accountability for individuals of this nature, and we need to ensure that a system of justice is not about how much money you have in this country, but the system of justice has to do with the infraction for which you were being charged, its impact on society, your background in the civil society, and whether or not you pose any kind of threat. So I'm delighted to be here with my freshman colleagues as we roll out this bill, and hopefully will gain support for what is a reform measure and should indeed be a bipartisan effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Representative Bernard Lawrence from Michigan.
I want to thank you and thank my members of the freshman class, I like to say freshman and freshwomen class, for the leadership here, and for Congressman Lieu's No Money Bail Act of 2016. Ladies and gentlemen, we are preaching to the choir, those of you who are here today. You know the impact of particularly those who are not wealthy, that are subjected to a prison system. And usually it's for crimes that are not of a level that there is a threat. Because understand, a judge has the authority and the right to say that this person will not be allowed to use bail because they are a threat to society. So this has been determined as an area that those who are economically challenged, and usually it's a high level of minorities, are directly impacted by the bail system that we have in America. We've been talking about criminal injustice, or making sure that we have a process in America to address the challenges we have in our justice system in America. This is one of many steps we need to take. It makes a difference. I like to always give some facts to drive why we do what we do. According to FBI crime statistics, more than 80 people were arrested in my district in 2012. In my district, 24% of the population was listed as living or below the federal poverty level. A single female, and so often we don't talk about the women who are subjected to our criminal justice system. So single female parent households make up 36% of that population. And more than 54% of that group consists of mothers raising children at age 5 or younger. You must understand the impact that this bail system would have on the families of those single women head of households. Delays of allowing these individuals to, yes, be held accountable in our justice system, but to have the freedom that someone who is wealthier enjoy every day is not justice. There's that saying that justice delayed is justice denied. Again, justice delayed is justice denied. And this is the first step. And I stand with my colleagues as we were sent here by the people to do the people's work, to be a voice for those who often don't have a voice. And I am honored and just so energized that we are going to make a difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And next we have Representative Ruben Gallego from Arizona.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you to my first termers. Got that right?
Yeah. Hopefully not just first term.
Yeah, just
We're working on it.
everybody, come on, knock out whatever. Well, Ted, thank you again for your leadership on this. It's really important we think about this. We're using 18th century forms of criminal, trying to control people that are accused of crimes in the 21st century. When we have a modern way of being able to track people that are going to be going to trial, or giving the option to the judge to deny bail for somebody who is a threat. And what we are essentially saying, and what Ted is dropping here as a bill, is that whether or not someone should be out on bail should be dependent on their security, not on their finances. And the idea that we as government stand by and take away somebody's liberty, entirely dependent upon how much is in their bank account, is really against what we should all stand for in the idea of a democracy. If you are a security risk, then you should not be out on bail. Until the government has proven that you are guilty of a crime that therefore we have a right to deprive you of your liberty. Any steps in between really is unconscionable when it comes to how we treat fellow citizens. So I really am proud to be jumping on this bill. Thank you, Ted, for your leadership on this, and I think that this is something we can be proud of. And though it may take some time, I do know that when we act here, other states, whether we enact it or not, will hopefully take it up as model legislation in their states because of the leadership that Ted showed you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. And for those watching on Periscope and Parachute TV, I am Representative Ted Lieu, joined here by my colleagues, Representatives Ruben Gallego, Brenda Lawrence, and Bonnie Watson-Coleman. And we're announcing major legislation to reform our criminal bail system. And to understand why we need to do this, we're going to have Kiana Williams come up and share with you her story, and you're going to see firsthand how broken this system is and why we need to change it. So, Kiana? Yeah, over here.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I am who the representatives are speaking about today. Cash bail has affected my life in a profound manner. Let me paint a picture for you all. Imagine you or your child being jailed shoulder to shoulder next to those security risks that you were speaking of. Drug dealers, drug users, for weeks at a time because you could not pay your bail, because you could not pay your fine. Imagine yourself or your own children being jailed without a bathroom or toilet to use, being jailed for weeks at a time, being jailed on Christmas, away from your children, away from your families, unable to get out because you can't pay your fines. This has been my life. I've had only minor offenses dealing with traffic issues that I have not been able to overcome because I've been jailed for so many times, for such a long amount of time. Locked down with gang people for weeks at a time. It just seems like a waste of my time, a waste of the time of the jail system. I could be a much great use to the society. However, I've been locked down for many weeks at a time over the course of 20 years of my life because I was unable to pay my fines. And it is my hope that this bill changes the system so that no one else has to suffer their life because of their poverty. Thank you all.
Thank you, Kiana, for coming here, for sharing your story and your courage. We really deeply appreciate it. We're going to hear next from Shannon Weiss, who also will share with you her story.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shannon, and last year, the ending days of October, I was taken away from my two children, which are toddlers. My son is 5 and my daughter is 3. I had a simple dispute with my sister, and the next day, the police came and they arrested me and told me I had a warrant for my arrest. I am a full-time student. I am a driver That's my career. I drive. I'm going to school for billing and coding, and I would have been graduating the beginning of January, but due to being housed inside of WDC in Baltimore City for 5 days of my life, held me back, and it took a lot from me because I was away from my children. I didn't know who was juggling around with my kids. I could hardly call home because that call cost $7 every time I picked up that phone. Once I left from Central Booking and went upstairs, my only outlet to think about my freedom was a window, not even bigger than any window in my house that I could think of. I could barely eat. I survived off of bread and fruit because I just couldn't bear the pain of being away from my children, being away from school, knowing I was almost finished, not knowing that a simple dispute could turn into a disaster of my life and take away everything. Being as though I was set a bail of $35,000, and then to go to bail review and be told that my bail would be revised to $100,000, and it was my first offense. I've never been arrested a day in my life. I'm just a young mom trying to make it. I really want to graduate and just make a better life and look for me and my children. And the system basically told me, like, hey, we're going to keep you here. And my family tried their best, and I really didn't have a lot of support, but that support did come. But I sat there, and I sat there, and I didn't know where my life was headed. And to hear multiple different women's stories and to see the different things that I was up against, I could have got hurt or been exposed to MRSA sitting inside of the jail because they had a woman in the same dormitory picking herself, doing different things. That's the things I endured. I didn't know what I would take back home to my children or anything, but those days were the worst. And to not understand the criminal justice system as a young lady, I went to preliminary hearing not knowing that, hey, this is not just your actual court date, but it's just a preliminary hearing. And we're going to drop this first charge that you're convicted with, but you got to come back. And thank God that my family was able to find a way to get me out on bond before that, or I would have missed Christmas, Thanksgiving, and New Year's away from my 2 children, and I may have not came home to my vehicle, my home, or my children. And I just thank everyone for allowing me to be a part of this experience and knowing what happened to me, and it's happening to a lot of other people. And I just feel, it's unfair when it comes to the system and bail. So I just like, again, to thank everyone for this experience here. And as far as what I've been through, which was a very, very hardship for me and my children, especially being as though they're ageless and whom and have them, and the system could have took my children from me. And I was a ward of the system, so it bothers me. And I just thank God for this experience here again with you guys. And I hope that we can make a difference with this changing of money bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon and Kiana, for sharing your stories. And the only difference between Shannon and Kiana, who were sitting in jail, and those in their exact situation who were set free, is income. And that is massively unfair. But it also creates this perverse incentive in our system where it causes people to plead guilty. It flips on its head the notion that people are innocent until proven guilty, because it creates this pressure where if they need to go to work, they need to take care of their children, they're going to do anything they can to not be sitting there in jail, and they'll often be incentivized to plead guilty even if they are not. And with that, we have remarks here from Michael Collins from the Drug Policy Alliance. Thank you, Michael, for coming.
Thank you so much, Congressman. I think you cannot fail to be moved by the stories that have been told today. Drug Policy Alliance is an organisation which opposes the failed war on drugs, and many of the individuals who are held on a pre-trial basis are individuals who are there for low-level, non-violent drug offences. So we really see bail reform as a key component of ending the failed war on drugs. We'd also say that right now we're very optimistic about the criminal justice reform movement in the country, even here in Congress, seeing a lot of movement on criminal justice reform legislation in the House and Senate. And I think that as the House moves forward with its criminal justice reform legislation, that bail reform is a part of that conversation. Drug Policy Alliance worked recently in 2014 on a ballot initiative in New Jersey around bail reform that passed, and is one of the big achievements of Drug Policy Alliance. And we would like to see that replicated across the country, and this legislation is a step in that direction. I want to thank the Congressman, Ted Lieu, and his staff, especially Megan, for all their help and support in this legislation. The Congressman has been a real leader on criminal justice reform since coming to Washington, and we hope that that continues. Just want to take the opportunity to introduce the next speaker, Susie Schaefer from the Pretrial Justice Institute.
Good morning. I'm Susan Schaefer. I'm the former director of the Pretrial Services Agency for the District of Columbia, a jurisdiction that I'm happy to say does not use money and has not used money for over 20 years in its pretrial justice process. I'm here on behalf of the Pretrial Justice Institute to enthusiastically endorse this legislative effort. PJI's core purpose is to advocate for fair, safe, and effective pretrial justice policies and practices. This act, the No More Money Bail Act of 2016, recognizes that the use of money in the criminal justice system prevents safe, fair, and effective pretrial justice outcomes. And I won't belabor what's been said so beautifully by others, but as we see, money does not provide equal justice. Poor people stay in, rich people get out, and has nothing to do with risk. And second, the high-risk defendants that get out, because they can pay money, they have wealth, and they get out at considerable risk to public safety. So it's really an insane system that does not protect the public and causes substantial harm. Our country must do better. We must provide that pretrial liberty should be determined in a due process appropriate way based upon one's risk and not upon one's wealth. An increasing body of research I want to point out, because this is awfully important, what's happened in the last 5-10 years, has clearly documented the harm that's been caused by money bail and by unneeded pretrial confinement. As you've heard from our eloquent speakers today, one additional point, suicide is the leading cause of death in jail since 2000, according to the Department of Justice, with pretrial detainees committing 4/5 of those suicides. People who are incarcerated for even a few days are more likely than the unconfined that are otherwise identically situated, same criminal history, same charges. They're more likely to lose jobs, lose income, lose family connections, more likely to plead guilty to get out of jail, more likely to receive a jail sentence or a prison sentence because they have been locked up all that time and not able to establish community resources that would put them in a good position for probation, and are more likely to engage in future crime as a result of all of this. So there's enormous public safety impact on locking up the wrong people and letting out the wrong people. This is just too high a price to pay for an outmoded cash bail system. The tools exist to replace this with a risk-based system that is fair and safe and effective. And in fact, jurisdictions like the District of Columbia, as the Congressman indicated, have done this for 20 years and demonstrated that it works. I suggest that states who want to keep their federal justice assistant grants consider joining PJI's 3 Days Count campaign to set a new common sense standard for pretrial justice. 4 points: reduce unnecessary and harmful pretrial incarceration, replace money bail, utilize risk-based decision-making, and establish reliable preventive detention processes for dangerous defendants with full due process protections. We think that this bill is an important step in the right direction, and we very much commend it. And thank you so much for the opportunity to join the effort. I think the next speaker is Rebecca Ballas from the Center for American Progress.
Thank you so much. I think folks are probably familiar with certain statistics. 2.3 million Americans are behind bars in prisons or jails today. 1 in 3 Americans now live with some type of criminal record. And according to recent analysis by the Center for American Progress, nearly half of United States children now have a parent with a criminal record. There is little question that our nation's failed experiment with mass incarceration and over-criminalization has reached a tipping point. And bipartisan momentum has been building in support of criminal justice reform. The Center for American Progress has been very pleased to work with partners across the aisle, many of whom are in this room, to seize this momentum to overhaul our nation's broken criminal justice system. Much of the bipartisan focus here in Washington has rightly centered on the need for sentencing reform, such as through tackling overly harsh mandatory minimums. But we must not lose sight of an important but all too rarely discussed component of the mass incarceration crisis, and that is why I'm so pleased that we're having this conversation today. The 12 million Americans who cycle in and out of local jails each year not having been sentenced for a crime. Many spend weeks, months, even years behind bars awaiting their day in court simply because they are too poor to post bail. People like Kiana and Shannon, whose powerful stories you've heard this morning. Locking people up because they are too poor to pay bail flies in the face of our nation's core values. It sets up a two-tiered justice system, one for the haves and one for the have-nots. And as you've heard, it also carries long-lasting economic and family consequences for the people whose lives it turns upside down. Being locked up pre-trial for even a few days or weeks, let alone months, can mean losing your job after you don't show up for work, being evicted from your apartment after you miss 1 or more rent payments, having your kids taken away if you're the sole caregiver. This is a big part of why our criminal justice system has come to serve as a major driver of poverty in America. As Congress works together to build a fair and equitable justice system, failure to reform this unjust and un-American practice risks missing a major piece of the puzzle. It is long past time that we as a nation stopped putting our citizens behind bars for the crime of being poor. The Center for American Progress applauds Representative Lieu and his co-sponsors for taking a very important first step towards addressing this problem. Thank you. And I'm pleased to introduce Lieu Garabedian, whose last name I always mispronounce, from the National Legal Aid and Defender Association. Thanks, Chair.
The Armenians say Garabedian, so you're pretty close anyway. I say Garabedian. Good morning. For more than a century, the National Legal Aid and Defender Association's work has been grounded in a single principle. The quality of justice people receive should not depend upon the amount of money that they have. The use of money bail is an unjust practice that imprisons the poor and disproportionately impacts people of color. Money bail simply has no place in a justice system that seeks to protect public safety, respect human dignity, and ensure the equitable treatment of people of all races, genders, the most vulnerable among us, anyone. For these reasons, the National Legal Aid and Defender Association is proud to endorse this bill. Congressman Lieu has made a powerful statement today about the critical place of bail reform within the broader criminal justice reform movement, finding bipartisan support throughout these halls. And harkening back to something Congressman Gallego alluded to earlier, bail itself is a bit of a relic. The United States was founded on the promise of justice, free from injurious monetary constraints. Our nation, from its very inception, has banned debtors' prisons and outlawed the criminalization of poverty, at least in theory, if not in practice. And bail itself was originally conceived as a means of promoting pretrial release. But in today's system, money bail simply locks up those without the financial means to buy their freedom. Action on this bill will allow our country to embrace the ideals of our history and our Constitution to create a more fair and prosperous future. We want to thank Congressman Lieu and co-sponsors Congresswoman Watson-Coleman, Congressman Lawrence, and Congressman Gallego. We stand with you and our allies to declare that the people's liberty is no longer for sale.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. This concludes this event, and I will be here to answer any additional questions.